Hello there, welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crime Grave Kokon, and in today's video we're going to be continuing our political theories series with, again, something which isn't necessarily a political theory. So you ask, why would I even call it a political theory? Whatever, just shush. But it's a concept which has affected the history of the world in a very substantial way, and you know, I feel that for this video, just like some of my other videos, are probably going to be demonetized because of how sensitive and how controversial some of the material within it is. And so you might say, why would a fledgling YouTube channel, which at the time of recording, hasn't even become monetized yet, why would I risk, from a purely business sense, to talk about such a thing? But I think that the impact that anti-Semitism has had on the world, I think it's something which needs to be spoken about, and I think to look at the history of some of these ideas beyond like kind of the just general understanding of it, I think it's much more important, much more useful than just doing things which are easy and which are just popular. And I think a lot of what people understand as anti-Semitism, when they think back, they just think Nazis, they think Holocaust and stuff, yeah. And the point of this video is to really explain to people that actually this idea of anti-Semitism, this thought virus as such, is something which is millennia old. It has manifested itself in virtually every single culture, every single time, and is still very prevalent today in some regions of the world. And yeah, so I myself am not Jewish. But it's the thing of, I think, like, even growing up and stuff, yeah, unless one is educated about like Jews and stuff, and their history and and their culture, etc., etc. Sometimes it is quite easy growing up to buy into some of the stereotypes of Jews and some of the conspiracy theories of that. So just really want to go through some of the history of this stuff, and just to help people to realize just how ingrained this sort of thinking was, and just how the Nazis, people have this view that that out of the kind of vacuum of like post World War One Germany, yeah, that all of a sudden Hitler just went, it's the Jews, and then like everyone in Germany suddenly went nuts and started hating Jews. This thinking is so lacking any kind of historical context, yeah, that hopefully the point of this video will be to just disprove just how mainstream this was in every single culture, and even people that we look up to quite highly, and it was just mainstream. It was so mainstream, and we really have to like delve into history of it. But before we do any of that, we have to like, comment, and subscribe, yeah, right? So I've actually kind of almost not completely run out of gimmicks for these things, to try and get you guys like your attention. But basically, all I have to say is, on a serious level, this channel has been going for roughly 2 months now, and at the moment I've got 39 subscribers, right? Which isn't a lot. It's certainly more than I thought I would have had at this point in time. But this channel, like, I really want it to grow into something really big, and I think the feedback I've got so far has been phenomenal, and the level of support that I've had, both from friends of mine and people who I've never met before, has been phenomenal. And yeah, it's so I definitely know that I'm onto something here with this channel, and I definitely know that like I have something important to add to things. But for this to become sustainable, for this to become like a long-term thing, something that I'll do for the next like however many years, it's gonna need like actual like support and stuff. Yeah. So this isn't a kind of like, please just give £2 a month or blah blah blah. It's not that kind of thing. Like, all you guys have to do is literally just like and comment and subscribe and thing. And that's not me begging you guys, not anything like that. It's literally just like, you know, the easiest way for you guys to help out the channel is just to do that very, very simple thing. And you know, by the next video, I'll think of some more funny way to kind of threaten people into subscribing and stuff. But in the meantime, you know, just yeah. And share it around as well. Yeah, there must be some other people that you know who have similar interests and stuff. And I know that the videos go on for a bit. It might be a bit off-putting, like, oh, I don't want to sit there for 50 minutes watching. Put it on times 1.5. That's all. Okay. Even I don't listen to myself at regular speed, and I tend to talk quite quickly. I still watch my videos on times 1.5. So that being said, let's actually get into the video. Now, anyone who's read the Bible, yeah, will know that there's... Damn you, ice cream, man! You lot might not even be able to hear that well, yeah. But I've been told that a lot of the times when I complain about noise in my videos, yeah, it's things I can hear, but you guys can't hear. But it's really distracting, really off-putting. Even if like a plane flies over, I go like... So anyway, so that being said, so the first sightings of any sort of thoughts that we could describe as anti-Semitism, it actually rises in ancient Egypt, yeah, in 270 BC, with the Egyptian historian Manetho. He described the Jews as lepers and as a polluted people, right? So if we think about the same kind of language that we see during the Third Reich, we also see this in, you know, that 270 BC Egypt, okay, right? And you know, time and time again, like different cultures that came in contact with Jews had these very negative views of them. So, for instance, the Greeks as well, like, you know, they desecrated their temples. They tried to, you know, so when Alexander the Great like conquered like kind of like that region, you know, they really tried to impose Greek culture onto the Jews and stuff. You know, they tried to like ban the practice of circumcision. They tried to get rid of many of their different like sacred like tenets and stuff. And actually, the festival of Hanukkah is actually the you know, this is basically you know the time of year when we celebrate Christmas. Yeah, this is the kind of like Jewish Christmas that people talk about. Like, no, but it's so Hanukkah is actually about the Jews. It's about a rebellion against the Maccabees. I think I've got that right. Or is it yeah, it's against the Maccabees, right? Or are they the Maccabees? I can't remember. Either way, it's about Jews rising up against the imposing influence of the Greeks onto their culture and onto their faith and stuff, right? And part of why Jews kind of stood out, especially in the ancient world, was, if you think about it, all religions since the dawn of time had always been polytheistic, meaning that people worship multiple gods. So there's a god for this and a god for that and okay, right? So Judaism was one of the first and is certainly one of the oldest like monotheistic religions, meaning a belief in just one god, in one deity, right? And so people in those times, yeah, right? So when people would conquer different regions, yeah, it'd just be a thing of, well, you, the subject people and stuff, yeah, like, you know, you can carry on worshipping your gods, but also we expect you to worship our gods and we'll worship some of your gods and what, etc., etc. So it ended up being a kind of like merging of different religions, and people would be like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, well, we'll just worship like those gods as well. And, you know, the Jews, because they were unshaken in their, we're not worshipping idols, we're not worshipping false gods, yeah, we're not even considering like doing any of that stuff, yeah, right? There's Yahweh, that, you know, the you know, like Adonai, like, kind of, you know, like the Lord, you know, like he is the only one. He's the only one we're praying to and stuff, right? And so the fact that they were completely unwilling to bend for that and any other part of their culture, any other part of their thing, from circumcision to what food they eat or anything like that, the fact that they were not willing to negotiate or compromise any of that meant that they stood up like a sore thumb. And you see this time and time again throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, in different cultures, the fact that the Jews stand out like a sore thumb because they are not willing to compromise any part of their religion, like kind of like in opposition to the people surrounding them. So then after this, yeah, you're not having, you know, the Roman Empire becoming the dominant force in the Mediterranean. And of all the peoples that the Romans conquered, yeah, the Jews tended to be a constant thorn in their side. Again, because they weren't willing to compromise. Again, they weren't willing to be subjected to by this empire, right? And as early as like 19 AD, you see like kind of Jewish rebellions like being like kind of like see uprisings against the Romans and then like crushings of them. We see in 66 from 66 to 70 AD, we see a massive uprising of the Jews where they try and kick the Romans out, and this leads to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which to this day, the Wailing Wall is like the Western Wall, which is the only remaining part of the historic temple and stuff. Yeah, this is why Jews to this day will still pray on kind of at the Wailing Wall, because this is the holiest site in Judaism. So if one ever goes to Israel, one will see like just how pivotal Jerusalem is to Jews, right? And in 138 AD, there's actually quite a lot of dates and stuff with this, yeah. So excuse me if I'm to read it. So in 138 AD, the Jews are expelled from Jerusalem itself, and they're banned from practicing their faith. They end up being, as the centuries go on, they end up being dispersed across the Mediterranean, and this is how the Jews end up forming the different groups of Jews that we think of today. The Sephardim, which are like kind of more Mediterranean Jews. The Mizrahim, which are the ones living in the Middle East. The Ashkenazi, who like kind of are basically ones living in Northern Europe. So we end up seeing these different groups here because of this scattering of, like, the Bible even speaks about this in terms of like kind of the Jews being scattered to the four corners of the earth and stuff, yeah, right? And it's amazing to think about it, of all the different civilizations, of all the different peoples that lived at that time. You had the Phoenicians, you had this, you had that, you had Babylonians, right? 2,000 years later, of all the different groups of people that lived at that time, the Celt, everything, right? The Jews are the only peoples who survived, because what one has to remember is that Judaism isn't merely a religion, it's also a way of life, it's also a culture, it's also like an ethnic group, it's a nation within itself, yeah. And no matter how far you disperse that nation, like people will always have that connection to Israel, right? So the Jews, even though they're scattered across the whole of the Roman Empire and across the whole world, like as time goes on, they still maintain that same identity. 10% of the Roman population were made up of Jews, right? So even though you had all these forced conversions, you had all these kind of things, right? It is a thing of, and especially with the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, in the 4th century. So when they started like kind of really cracking down on Judaism there, they forced a lot of people to convert and stuff. And it's estimated that if it hadn't been for these forced conversions, during that period, the current population of Jews in the world today would be at 200 million. And as it currently stands, it's only at 15 million. So this gives an extent of just how much Jewish culture and Jewish religion has been suppressed over the millennia, right? Then moving forward, past the fall of Rome, you still had, in Christendom, in Christian Europe, basically, we still continue to have these kind of discriminations against Jews and stuff for a long time, and especially with the advent of the Crusades and stuff, right? It led to a huge kind of backlash, in Europe, against non-Christians, right? So Jews being the prime targets there. So the myth of them being Christ killers, because obviously within the Bible, it speaks about how the Jews kind of said, oh no, they voted basically to have Jesus crucified and stuff, as for being a false Messiah, and with with regard to this, yeah, like kind of it, they end up being what we today describe as pogroms. So basically like persecutions, like massacres, yeah, of Jews. And the very famous one of this, so if you go to the city of York, in England, yeah, you can still go up to. There's a castle. I can't remember the exact name of the castle now. It escapes me. But there in 1190 AD, there was a massacre in York of all the Jews. So all the Jews in the town fled up into this little castle thing, and yeah, they end up being like completely wiped out. And yeah, like events like this took place all across Europe during this time, and country after country then started to expel Jews. Yeah, so you see this in France, you see this in many of the German states, in many of the Italian states, etc. And you know, even England itself, which we think of today as being like very liberal and very tolerant, yeah, actually expelled Jews and banned any Jews from living in England from 1290 up until 1654, right? So that's a huge, huge expanse of time, yeah, right? You're talking like over 350 years, yeah, of Jews being completely banned from the country. It took until Oliver Cromwell, yeah, decided to let Jews in, yeah. So you're talking about like a huge, huge swath of time, yeah. Yeah. So this kind of shows just how kind of endemic it was. And actually, here's another statistic, yeah, that will blow you away. Because in Europe, yeah, the only two places that really tolerated Jews were Holland and Poland. Poland, yeah, which at that time was actually interestingly the largest country in Europe in terms of like landmass, yeah. Poland had 80% of the world Jews in the 16th century, right? So yeah, you talk about 1500s, 80% of world Jewry lived in Poland. That's how persecuted they were in all the rest of the countries in Europe. They were kicked out every other country in Europe, and the only place that they really had to go to, for the most part, was Poland, right? So, again, like kind of when we skip forward to the Holocaust and stuff, yeah, and we think why were there so many Jews living in Poland, yeah, like kind of in the Warsaw Ghetto, etc., etc. That's the legacy of that is because Poland for centuries was the only safe place for Jews to live in. But you know, even though Jews like faced a lot of discrimination in this time, and even though you know plagues were blamed on them, etc., etc., because you know what we have to think about is Jewish like religious practices, yeah, like kind of really have really big emphasis on cleanliness, and considering at the time most like Christians like kind of did not have very like good like hygiene standards and stuff, right? It meant that they would end up being more prone to disease. So when like things like the Black Death, for instance, spread through Europe, Jewish communities tended to be a lot more immune from it just because they weren't living in such filthy conditions, right? As the nearby Christians. So this ended up leading to suspicions where they basically said, the Jews are poisoning the wells, they're doing this, they're doing that, etc., right? This is where it's also a time when the myth of like blood libel came about, where it was believed that Jews would like take Christian like children and like slit their throats and like use the blood for their like rituals and stuff. So really, really like ugly stuff. And we see this same mythology, yeah, again with the Nazis, yeah, like kind of hundreds of years later. The same, there's even like pictures of it and stuff like kind of like in the Nazi newspapers, yeah, like the Stürmer, yeah, right. So it's really a lot of the kind of like deeper mythology of like anti-Semitism like really predates anything that we see in the modern era, right? And but even still, Jews challenged like Christians and stuff, yeah, right, on an intellectual basis, on a spiritual, you know, like, and the high point of this, yeah, is if probably gonna butcher the name, yeah, but Nachmanides, right? So in the Disputation of Barcelona, yeah, in 1263, this Jewish intellectual, right, debated with high up people in the Catholic Church, right? Because they put on this kind of like this show kind of debate, and basically were trying to use it as a platform to be able to disprove to the Jews and stuff, yeah. But basically saying like, look, Jesus the Old Testament predicts Jesus and stuff, right? And like clearly Jesus is the Messiah, whereas obviously Jews believe that he's not the Messiah because he doesn't fit all of the criteria, right? So Nachmanides, he made the point that, hold on, so for instance, so Christians will point to the prophet Isaiah and to other prophets and stuff and say, look, because Jesus fits some of the criteria in this thing, yeah, it clearly is referencing him. Nachmanides took the standard Jewish line, which is that, well, actually, for the Messiah to come, it can't just be some of the prophecies have been fulfilled, all of them to be fulfilled. So, for instance, it talks about how in the end times, like kind of when the Messiah comes back, the lion will lay down the lamb, and the sword will be turned into plowshares and stuff. Yeah, i.e., there will be complete peace on the world, right? And they said, well, Nachmanides said, well, Christ died over 1,200 years ago, and yet there's clearly still war. There's clearly not peace all around the world, etc., etc. But like, never mind all the other kind of like prophecies that attach to it. So it was like, well, clearly, then by this internal reasoning, yeah, like Christ cannot be the Messiah, because how else does one explain like all these other things, all these other parts of the prophecy not being fulfilled, right? And Christians didn't actually really have much to say against this, and so, one can see that like in later disputations with other Jews as the centuries went on, this debate here, this disputation was a very rare one, because the person defending the Jewish faith in this instance, yeah, was given far more like freedom to speak and to make their arguments, yeah, than were later Jews, right? In other examples of these disputations, it was a thing of it was more akin to like a show trial kind of thing, yeah, where they weren't actually really able to make what the arguments that they wanted to make. Now we're going to get into like the history of how Jews like kind of like live in the Islamic world and stuff a little bit later on, but for now we have to understand that at least for a time in Islamic during the time when Spain was run by the Muslims, for a brief golden era, yeah, there was a time where Spain was the high point of Jewish like intellectual and cultural kind of like it was the main like scene where they could freely exercise their faith, and many Jews in that kind of in Spain during this time, they did have a lot of rights. They had people of great influence, like kind of and like very like. They were freer than they were in many other places in Christian Europe, right? But this all came to an end in 1492 with the final conclusion of the Reconquista. So with the fall of Granada in 1492, there was an edict that went out that basically expelled all the Jews from Spain. They said you either have to convert, or you have to like flee, basically. And many of them who fled ended up going to places like Holland. Many of them went to places in the New World, because 1492 is also the year where Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, right? He landed in the Americas, and so. Even the city of New Amsterdam, which the Dutch founded, which was later taken over by the British and became the famous New York, Jews, Sephardim Jews, Sephardi Jews, like who originally were from Spain, went to Holland and then went over there. But even there, they were restricted, right? So in North America, all the way up until the American War for Independence, yeah, Jews were still denied the right to vote in many of the colonies, right? So even in what we now consider like kind of America, the land of the free, home of the brave, etc., etc., even there, Jews were discriminated against. Right, so now this section here, this is where things start getting very ugly, and we have like a whole bunch of quotes from different people, right? So one would expect with the Enlightenment era, for the more, so most of the arguments against like Jews, most of the anti-Semitism before this had been like on religious grounds in terms of them being Christ killers, etc., right? So one would expect with the kind of like so-called Age of Reason and the Age of the Enlightenment, yeah, that many of these arguments would die away. But there ended up being a clear argument between can Jews assimilate, should they assimilate, and basically it all comes down to a thing of during this time again, because they had more and more concept of scientific racism, of like blood and soil, of all these kind of like concepts, right? It meant that those who made arguments that Jews should have the right to assimilate and ought to assimilate and stuff, yeah, end up coming up against people who said, well, no matter what they do, no matter if they convert, no matter what, they are still tainted by Jewish blood and stuff, right? So, trigger warnings, we're going to be reading a lot of quotes here, and like some of them will be from quite distinguished people that you like one would not have expected, right? So, we're going to go country by country now, right? So, we're going to start off with Britain, right? And the British, the British Isles in general, right? So, just again to get the notion out of one's head that that anti-Semitism is just something that came out of Germany, and this reads some of the quotes. So, this is from Lord Balfour, right? So famous for the Balfour Declarations, of which led to the creation of the State of Israel, right? He has no prejudices against the race, far from it. But I began to understand the point of view of those who are opposed to I can't read my own handwriting, to foreign immigration, yeah. So it's the original kind of like, I'm not a racist, but yeah, like it's kind of, I don't have a problem with Jews, but I can see why people would have a problem with them. And this is from James Joyce, yeah, right? They do not know how to use the latrine, meaning like the toilet, and they prefer their own semi-barbarous habits, right? He also referred to many industrialists, Jewish industrialists during this time as the sweaters of modern Israel, right? So all the kind of people owning the factories and everything at the time, he basically was like, oh, well, they're all just Jews, making making Gentiles sweat, basically. And Hugh O'Donnell, the Irishman, he spoke about the Jew kings the Jew kings were come, but Parliament of England gone, right? And talk about the Jew kings of opium, the Jew kings of railways, etc., etc. So this recurring idea of the Jews. So it's a kind of juxtaposition, yeah, between England being a very class conscious society in that time, yeah, is a juxtaposition that we see time and time again with in other contexts as well, yeah, whereby Jews are either seen as dirty or they're seen as kind of they're super rich capitalists and stuff, yeah, but they don't really belong in that class. It's got a very snobby kind of form of racism, right? Now with France, right? So France, different mindset, yeah. Napoleon was the one who allowed who emancipated the Jews and stuff, but always with the mindset of the Jews. It's to do with the question is to do with the loyalty to the French nation and stuff, right? So the French artist Renoir, right? They come to France to make money. The moment a fight is on, they hide behind the first tree. Every country chases them out. There must be a reason for that, right? This is Juin. I can't pronounce French, as you know, right? They're leper, blood-sucking people. Go into. Bro, I actually should have focused on my handwriting while writing this. Yeah, going to arise arrogantly like a gigantic boa whose constricting coils are tied round a dying world, squeezing and crushing it. So this idea of Jews basically being trying to crush the life out of France and the whole world. And also as well, this was written at the time of the Dufresne affair, which is basically like French military court, yeah, like kind of like tried a Jewish officer called Dufresne, and basically it really tore France in half, yeah, because 80% of the press, yeah, were anti this guy. A lot of people in the establishment were completely anti this guy. Like vast waves of the French population believed that he was a German spy because he's a Jew, so his loyalty to France, yeah, like, is very questionable, right? Right, now gonna see what it's like in Russia, right? So Russia, so if we think about the Holocaust, yeah, like kind of Russia, the Ukraine, Belarus, like kind of like these kind of places end up being like kind of like places where a lot of Jews lived because the Tsarist regime banned Jews from living anywhere except for the Pale of Settlement, right? And so the idea of the Protocols of Zion, yeah, in 1903, forges Tsarist secret police, yeah, right? So this like the Tsarist secret police, they forged this concept called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, right? And they within this theory is basically a Jewish plot to take over the world and stuff, right? And so this idea first arose out of like Russia, right? And end up it was a convenient kind of thing for the Tsarist regime to kind of be like, oh, like don't look at us here, like kind of like look at the Jews and stuff, yeah. And this kind of led to a lot of the pogroms and stuff, right? And they said that Jews are the root of all evil, the sole cause of our misfortune. So with this, we can see that actually 40 years before the Holocaust, yeah, these same communities out in like the Pale of Settlement, yeah, i.e. the Ukraine, etc., before Babi Yar and like the massacres that took place during the Holocaust, yeah, we can really see quite entrenched within Russian culture and like the other Ukrainian culture, etc. We can see this deep rooted anti-Semitism, and so to move on to Germany around the same period, we see quotes such as from Fyodor Baurov, him saying, "A Jew can no more be a German than a Persian, Frenchman, New Zealander, or African." So Germany during this time has really, its nationalism already at this early stage is very much steeped in this kind of like blood and soil mentality, which was something which we see really clearly with the Nazis. And other quotes such as from von Trischel, which is the Jew is our misfortune, right? So echoing like the same thing that I said like in Russia, right? Langer, he starts speaking about the Jewish question as early as 1905 in terms of like what to do with the Jews as such. And even Karl Marx, who himself was of Jewish descent, said that secular cult of the Jew is haggling. What is its secular god? Money. Money is the jealous god of Israel, right? So, and then like with Wagner, yeah, who's a very influential composer, yeah, who Hitler himself like kind of like looked up to in great regard, even though he did have Jewish friends himself, yeah, spoke very well. We just see from this quote here: European culture is a foreign tongue in which the Jew has no part to the evolution. Right, the Jew is a homeless person who has been a cold, nay, a hostile onlooker, right? So, really this idea of Jews being separate from the Aryan race as such, having no part in European culture, always being a hostile onlooker, this idea of this othering of the Jews, yeah, like this, like the fact of there's no chance of them assimilating because no matter what they do to assimilate, yeah, they're always going to be this kind of perverse like force within them, right? And it's then little wonder how you're having a Holocaust, yeah, when you had views disentrenched across even quite liberal countries like kind of like Britain and stuff, right? And again, after World War One, you start to see more of this kind of these views become like really entrenched as well, because this idea of Jews on the one hand being capitalists and on the other hand being Bolsheviks, yeah, because many of the leading communists in Russia and in Germany and many other places were themselves Jewish, and so it all ends up becoming intermeshed with this wider conspiracy, and so even groups like that we think of as, you know, like the KKK, for instance, yeah, in America, groups that we wouldn't normally associate with anti-Semitism. Like, we tend to think that in terms of more anti-black discrimination, yeah, but, you know, like the KKK like discriminate against Jews as well, and so there was, you know, within both Europe and America in this time, anti-Semitism is a fundamental belief held by the vast majority of people. You know, but at the same time, the story is not all doom and gloom. So in any country where Jews are able to operate, you know, like kind of, and able to, you know, be themselves essentially without fear of persecution, they flourish. And what's quite funny is that Jews for many centuries, yeah, had been restricted, yeah, from many professions, right? And one of the few ones that they could operate in was banking, because Christians and Muslims, yeah, had restrictions on the practice of usury, which is basically lending money for interest, yeah, so i.e. modern banking, right? And Jews, because like they were exempt from that, like if people wanted cheap credit, they would go to Jews for it. And as a result, Jews, just like many other middleman groups around the world, whether it's the Armenians or the Igbos in Nigeria or etc., right? They operate like as traders, as entrepreneurs, as innovators and stuff, right? And as a result, then on top of that, you know, that added to the fact of them being a highly educated, highly literate population, yeah, you know, themselves being like from a very young age being taught to be able to read the Torah, and then for many of them being bilingual, both in their own language and in the language of the wider population around them, right? It's a thing of having people who are bilingual and highly educated, yeah, at a time when most people around them would have been, oh, people are coming in now. Most people around them would have been illiterate peasants. It means that, well, of course, there's going to be a disparity between those who there's going to be a disparity between those who have wealth and those who do not have wealth, because they have all the means to be able to acquire wealth. And if one has a very limited view of economics, a very primitive view on it, where one has a zero sum like analysis on it, in the sense of some people, if someone has wealth, then it means that someone else has taken that wealth from someone else, right? So people with that kind of mindset, if they saw wealthy Jews and they saw poor Gentiles, the conclusion that they came to is that the Jews must be rich because they've taken money from the Gentiles, when actually that's the complete wrong approach to take to it. Instead of copying the good habits of the Jews, they became envious, they became jealous, and that was a big source of the anti-Semitism and a lot of the pogroms that took place. And we must also bear in mind that anti-Semitism is not just a European phenomenon. Yeah, that in the Middle East, you know, you had the concept within Islam. You have the concept of dhimmis. Yeah, right. So dhimmis are people of the book as such. Yeah, right. So they're monotheistic people. So Jews and Christians. Yeah, but it's a thing of they have a special tax levied on them. Like to encourage that, well, at least this was historically what was the case, yeah. So in Muslim countries, it was a thing of, yeah, taxes would be levied on people, like to kind of encourage them to convert towards Islam, yeah. So if you're having to pay an extra tax for being a Jew or Christian, you may as well just become a Muslim and not have to pay that tax, right? So the discrimination against Jews for most of the period of Islam was never as intense as it was in the Christian world, because there was no equivalent of like Christ killers, yeah, like for Muslims, right? However, from like the 1840s onwards, you did start to have a rise of multiple different kind of reactionary forces that taking place within Islam, right? So you had increase in like kind of like religious fundamentalism, which prior to this you hadn't really had in the Muslim world, and also a rise of Arab nationalism. So for the remaining Jews who lived in like kind of in the Muslim world and stuff, right, they started to face a lot more discrimination. So in places like Lebanon, in places like Palestine, which is now like kind of like the state of Israel, because there were still some Jews living there, and many other places around like the Ottoman Empire, etc. Jews faced pogroms there too. So the reason why I bring this up with regard to the Muslim world is to kind of dispel the notion that that hostility amongst Arabs, for instance, towards Jews has come only since the creation of the State of Israel, or since at very earliest the Balfour Declaration of 1920. So in reality, anti-Semitism in the Arab world is at least 100 years, if not more, like prior to the creation of the State of Israel, right? With pogroms taking place all across the Muslim world, right? So if that's the case, then people saying, oh, the Balfour Declaration, which divided up the state of Israel, which started to separate the province of the mandate of Palestine, between Jews and Arabs, this is the beginning of why they became hostile. But actually, what we can see is that after the British take over Palestine, from the Ottomans, right, and they create the mandate for Palestine, the Jews who started settling there in the 1920s, they were just they just were living there. They're setting up little communities, etc., etc. And there were riots, there were pogroms, there was all kinds of massacres that took place here. And actually, one of the during the Holocaust, it was actually a thing where there was actually collaboration with the Nazis. So, for instance, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, there's a famous picture of him with Adolf Hitler, and and the two of them kind of Nazi propaganda kind of spread throughout much of the Middle East, in terms of the kind of the vitriol against Jews and stuff, and so because such a fuss kind of bit was being made and stuff, it meant that actually during the Holocaust, where Jews wanted to flee to Palestine, the British authorities actually banned mass migration to Palestine because they feared the backlash that would happen with the Arabs and stuff. And so really kind of get this notion out of your head that the anti-Semitism within the Muslim world it's purely down to the policies of the Israeli government. And today, no, actually it predates it, much as it does in the rest of the world. Anti-Semitism is not a new phenomenon, so people shouldn't ascribe the current anti-Semitism to just blame it on Israel, right? Clearly, the hatred is a lot more deep rooted. So now we're going to talk about anti-Semitism in the modern era. So with after the Holocaust, you had the creation of the State of Israel, because the Jews needed a homeland which they could be secure in, and what better place than their historic homeland from 2,000 years before. And obviously, the Jews, when they first started settling in Palestine, were not trying to kick the Arabs out, but due to the hostility that they faced amongst the Arabs and stuff, it was a thing of, as time went on, became more and more of a thing of, they were well, actually, we're going to have to fight for this land. Sorry, 75% of European Jewry was exterminated during the Holocaust. Everyone from people all the way from Russia to Italy to France to Poland to Germany to the Channel Islands, even, because the Channel Islands were occupied by the Nazis, and people from all of these places collaborated with the Nazis in the Holocaust. So this is something we have to remember as well. And 90% of German Jewry was wiped out, and as was 90% of Polish Jewry. So we had to really understand that this was the attempted genocide of the Jewish people. This was the attempt to actually fully wipe all Jews on the face of the earth out. And so now the Jews finally had an opportunity to defend themselves, and defend themselves they would. And so, when Israel was founded, all the Arab countries kind of ganged up on them to try and destroy them, and they managed to fight off against them. And there'd been many Israeli-Arab wars, and there's been many incursions with the Palestinians, and there still is a lot of questions today about what should happen with Gaza and West Bank and Golan Heights here. But going to Israel and Palestine myself a few years ago in 2014, is the thing of, 90% of the time in Israel/Palestine, Jews and Arabs do peacefully coexist. They do live shoulder to shoulder. And so the idea that people are not going to be able to actually coexist together, I don't think that's wholly the case. I think that people can and indeed ought to live in peace and harmony together. And Israel is not perfect. No nation is perfect. At the same time, it is a recognition that within the state of Palestine, there are no Jews allowed, and whereas within the state of they're not Jews are not allowed to be citizens of Palestine and stuff. Whereas within Israel itself, 20% of its population are Arab Israelis, and with full rights as citizens. They serve in the military and they serve in the Israeli parliament or their Knesset, and so it's a thing of actually in an ideal world one would hope that because Jews have lived shoulder to shoulder with Christians and with Muslims throughout the centuries, so why all of a sudden, except for some very, very extremist ones, most of them have no problem living shoulder to shoulder with non-Jews. And also it's something to note that, other than it, with the exception of Israel, the country that has the most Jews in the world is America, which, Israel's got roughly 6 million Jews, they have roughly 6 million Jews. And so, and there are still many Jews that live in many other places around the world, but it's something to note that while many Palestinians, for instance, were expelled at the time of the creation of Israel, there were also 700,000 Jews who were expelled from Middle Eastern countries in that same period. And the recognition that actually much of the attitudes towards the Jews in terms of anti-Semitism is still very inbuilt. So I'm now going to read out some stats here from so this was in 2014. This was opinion polls being taken around the world, right? And this is from the ADL, so the Anti-Defamation League. And so these are some of the stats in terms of there's multiple different factors where they ask different questions about do you think that Jews have too much influence in the industry or this, etc., etc. And so they compiled these data, right? So 78% of Lebanese holds some sort of anti-Semitic views, 81% of Jordanians, 74% of Egyptians they all have unfavorable views of Jews. There are currently in the world 1.09 billion anti-Semites. And just to give so for instance, in Poland, 10% of their population in 1939 were Jews. Today, the number is as low as 7,000, right? And 18% of people in Poland still have a little motif called good luck coin or something, or a Jew with a coin. So basically you have the picture of a Jew with a coin is supposed to bring good luck to the household. And so this lucky Jew motif is still very prevalent in Poland, right? And in terms of again anti-Semitic views and stuff, right? 11% of people in the UK have anti-Semitic views, right? 54% of British Muslims have anti-Semitic views of one kind of another. 10% of Americans have anti-Semitic views. In Germany, 15%, Russia, 33%, Poland, 48%, and Ukraine, 46%. So we can still see that actually the legacy of anti-Semitism, the historically hard entrenched views of anti-Semitism, all the myths, all the conspiracy theories about them have not gone away. They are still very much at the deep part of people's psyches, and this ties in with This ties in with like a Shakespeare play called Merchant of Venice, which is about a Jew called Shylock, yeah, and within that story he's painted as the villain, but however the way that he's mistreated throughout the thing, it gives a clear indication. And bear in mind, at the time that Shakespeare wrote this, Jews were still banned in England, as we've already said. So there's a famous like soliloquy that Shylock like says, yeah, where he says, "Have not a Jew eyes? Have not a Jew like hands, organs, dimensions?" Like, you know, I can't remember the exact like all of the quote, yeah, right. But if you prick us, do we? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? The same villainy that you practice on us, yeah, we will exact on you, right? And so this idea of Jews being separate people, of Jews being like a kind of insidious like kind of section of society, like of them being this hostile kind of plotting conspiratorial part, you know, the vast majority of anti-Semites have never come across Jews. Yeah, that's just a fact. Like the vast majority of them have never had a Jewish friend, have never had like kind of, have never like gone to a bar mitzvah, have never studied anything to do with like Jewish culture and stuff, right? They don't know anything about the history of it. They don't know anything about the suffering of the Jews. Don't know anything about like anything that makes the Jews, you know, anything that makes the Jews human. Yeah, the fact that there are good people and bad people, the fact that you can find humanity and well, everything that humanity like entails within all people. You can find great goodness as well as great evil within everyone. And so to find one person who has done XYZ, or to find, you know, it's the most lazy kind of thinking, yeah, and it's the most dehumanizing kind of thinking, because if we don't understand that we are all human beings and that we all have equal worth in this world, and that just because people pray to a different god than you, or from a different ethnic background than you, or have different culture to you, to think that they are inherently good or inherently evil is to really, it really attacks the very core of what it means for all of us to be humans, right? Because if you can dehumanize one group of people, then you can dehumanize everyone. And it's like that old poem that was written. It's like, first they came for this group, and then they came for that group, they came for this group, and they came for the Jews, and then they came for me, and there was no one to defend me. There was no one left to defend me. So with that being said, I hope that this video, if anything, has shown some light on the fact that actually anti-Semitism, just like as we've done with racism and many of the other things, yeah, they didn't just spring out of nowhere, yeah, they didn't just like arise out of this one moment in history and that's it, yeah, like it's actually a much more deeply entrenched thing, and for us, it's only by us understanding that wider history that we can actually learn from it and build a better future. So that being said, if you enjoyed this video or learnt a lot from this video, which is probably a better thing to say with it, is yeah, I would say definitely like, comment and subscribe. I will try my best to put the links in the description and stuff. I know there's quite a lot of like material to cover, and undoubtedly, as with all these things, there's probably many things that I've left out. I'm not perfect. I'm not an expert on these things. These are just topics which I think are very important, and I think that there needs to be more light shone on them. And I happen to have expertise in many of a degree of expertise in these areas, and so that's why I make these kind of videos. So yeah, till next time, thank you and goodbye.